Have you ever wondered whether living alone at this stage of life is really a failure, or whether it might actually be a quiet form of strength? For years we've been told that reaching a certain age with a partner is a sign of success, and that loneliness, especially after 60, is something to avoid, hide, or even regret. Many older adults carry a silent guilt for living alone, as if something went wrong along the way. Yet what almost no one talks about is that there are experiences, benefits, and transformations that only appear when you are alone with yourself, without witnesses, without noise, and without external demands. Today, I want to invite you to look at this reality from a different place, not from fear or resignation, but from clarity, because living alone after 60 is not always a loss. Very often, it is a deep gain, mentally, physically, and spiritually. And understanding this can completely change the way you relate to yourself, to others, and to your own life. I'm Gabriel. I've spent many years studying and practicing Stoicism applied to everyday life, especially in maturity and relationships. If these kinds of reflections help you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and stay until the end of this video, because the final point is usually the most liberating. What if the greatest rest you can give yourself at this age is not physical but mental? Many people reach their 60s with a tired body, yes, but above all with an overloaded mind. Overloaded with conversations that don't nourish them, conflicts that never get resolved, explanations they no longer want to give, and uncomfortable silences shared with others. Living alone, when it is a conscious choice and not an imposition, often brings an unexpected benefit. Silence stops feeling empty and begins to turn into order. When I talk about this first benefit, mental silence and emotional clarity, I'm not referring to a silent house or the total absence of human contact. I mean something deeper. The disappearance of the constant noise created by worn-out relationship dynamics. Not having to anticipate someone else's mood, not walking on emotional eggshells, not having to justify every small decision of the day. At this stage, which I call mental silence and emotional clarity, many people discover for the first time in years what it feels like for their mind to truly rest. The Stoics spoke very clearly about this, even if they didn't use our modern words. Epictetus insisted that much of our suffering does not come from what happens to us, but from the constant friction with what is not under our control. Living with others, especially later in life, often means being permanently exposed to emotional states that are not ours to manage and that, without realizing it, we end up carrying. Living alone reduces that friction, not because we become selfish, but because we stop living in a state of constant emotional alert. I've heard many older people tell me something very simple, yet very revealing. Gabriel, since I started living alone, I think more clearly. I sleep better. I react less. This is no coincidence. Modern psychology knows that the brain needs low stimulation spaces to process emotions, make decisions with perspective, and regulate the nervous system. When the environment becomes predictable and non-invasive, the mind stops being defensive and begins to organize what it has been carrying for years. At this first point, it's important to understand something essential. Silence is not abandonment. Chosen silence is an act of self-care. It is the space where you can hear yourself without interference, where emotions settle, and where many inherited guilt patterns begin to lose their power. You no longer have to react all the time. You can respond. And that difference, even if it seems subtle, completely changes the experience of living. With this in mind, it becomes easier to understand why so many people after 60 discover that living alone doesn't make them sadder, but clearer. And when there is clarity, there is peace. And when there is peace, life begins to feel livable again, even beautiful in its simplicity. There is a truth that is rarely said out loud. Living with others later in life can tire the body more than the heart. Not necessarily because of a lack of love, but because after 60, the body starts asking for something different. It asks for its own rhythm, real pauses, less forced schedules, and a more honest relationship with its needs. Living alone opens that door almost immediately, even if at first it isn't always obvious. As we move into this second point, reclaiming your body and your own rhythm, it's important to understand that we're not talking about isolation or neglect, but about something far more basic and profound. The human body, especially at this stage of life, suffers when it is constantly adapting to other people's schedules, habits, and demands. Eating when you're not hungry, sleeping when your body isn't ready, holding conversations when your energy is already depleted. All of this, accumulated over the years, eventually takes its toll. From neuroscience, we know that stress doesn't always come from major crises, but from constant micro-adjustments. The nervous system doesn't distinguish between a serious conflict and repeated everyday tension. Living alone noticeably reduces that invisible load. The body stops anticipating, stops adjusting, stops staying on alert. Slowly, it begins to live according to its own tempo. And when the body starts setting the pace again, many unexplained aches and discomforts begin to ease. At this stage, which I call reclaiming the body and your own rhythm, many people discover something they didn't expect. They move more, not less. They walk because they want to, not because they have to. They rest without guilt. They prepare their food with care instead of treating it like a chore. The body stops being an instrument at the service of others and becomes a place you can live in again. Seneca said that there is no greater poverty than living without listening to oneself, and this applies to the body as much as to the mind. Something important also happens on an emotional level. When the body feels respected, irritability goes down. Patience increases. The relationship with oneself becomes gentler. Many older adults are surprised to discover that what they thought was bad temper was actually accumulated physical exhaustion. Living alone in this sense becomes a quiet form of everyday medicine. Reclaiming your own rhythm is not about becoming rigid or selfish. It is about recognizing that at this age, the body no longer negotiates the way it once did. Listening to it is not giving up. It is honoring the life that is still beating. When the body truly rests, the mind follows, and when both align, the sense of personal dignity grows in a deep and peaceful way. There is an uncomfortable question that many people avoid asking themselves after 60. Who am I when I am no longer fulfilling the role of mother, father, partner, or emotional support for others? For decades, much of our identity is built around what we give, what we solve, and what we hold together. Living alone at this stage confronts that question directly. And although it can feel unsettling at first, over time it becomes one of the most strengthening experiences there is. When I talk about this third benefit, strengthening identity and personal boundaries, I mean something very specific. Stepping away from defining yourself solely by external demands and beginning to recognize yourself as a whole, valid, and worthy person, even when you are not being useful to anyone else. In long-term cohabitation, especially with adult children or unbalanced relationships, boundaries tend to blur. Giving in, staying silent, and postponing yourself becomes normal. Living alone breaks that pattern in a natural way. Marcus Aurelius wrote that no one can take away your character without your consent, and yet over the years, many people give that consent without realizing it, simply to avoid conflict or guilt. At this stage, which I call strengthening identity and personal boundaries, living alone acts as an honest mirror. No one pushes you, no one demands from you, no one defines you, and in that space, a clear identity emerges, less reactive and more grounded. Something very interesting happens here on a psychological level. When there is no constant presence invading your space, the emotional system reorganizes itself. You begin to notice what you truly like, what bothers you, and what you are no longer willing to tolerate. not from anger, but from clarity. Boundaries stop being defensive walls and become calm lines that protect your dignity, and that dignity in later life is pure gold. Before moving on, I want to take a brief pause. If this content is resonating with you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and leave your name and the country you're watching from in the comments. I always read the comments, and this space is also built through that quiet but meaningful exchange between people who are walking a similar path. That said, let's return to the point. Strengthening identity does not mean becoming hard or disconnected. Quite the opposite. When you know who you are and where you stand, the relationships that remain become healthier. You no longer give out of fear of losing, you give by choice. You no longer accept out of guilt, you accept out of coherence. And living alone after 60 is often the first step toward reclaiming that inner sovereignty you should never have lost. There's a widespread idea that living alone means being left without support. But later in life, something paradoxical often happens. When constant external support disappears, many people discover that there is a much firmer foundation within themselves than they ever imagined. And that is what this fourth point is about: the inner freedom and spiritual autonomy that often emerge when someone lives alone after 60. At this point on the journey, we have already understood the value of silence, of respecting the body, and of having clear boundaries. With that in place, something more subtle yet deeply transformative begins to appear. Inner space expands. There are no constant interruptions, no outside expectations colonizing every corner of the day. And in that apparent emptiness, a more honest dialogue with oneself begins. This point, which I call inner freedom and spiritual autonomy, has nothing to do with religion or rigid beliefs, but with a more direct and mature relationship with one's own consciousness. The Stoics spoke of inner self-sufficiency, not as isolation, but as the ability to be at peace with oneself even in the absence of company. Epictetus said that anyone who depends on external things to feel well will always be vulnerable. Living alone, when approached with awareness, reduces that dependence. You no longer need someone else to confirm your worth, your direction, or your decisions. You begin to listen to yourself with greater respect, even when what arises is not comfortable. Many people tell me something very revealing at this stage. Gabriel, now I can think without rushing. I can read slowly. I can be in silence without feeling strange. That is spiritual autonomy. It is reclaiming the right to a rich inner life without having to explain or justify it. Modern culture pushes us to fill everything with noise, stimulation, and distraction. But in maturity, the soul asks for something else. It asks for depth, meaning, and coherence. Something important also happens in relation to the past. Living alone creates space to revisit one's own story without the constant filter of other people's opinions, not to get stuck in what was, but to make peace with it. Viktor Frankl said that when a person finds meaning, even suffering changes its form. In chosen solitude, many people reinterpret losses, mistakes, and past decisions, not from guilt, but from understanding. This inner freedom does not pull you away from the world. It makes you more selective. You no longer need to be surrounded by others to feel alive. And when you choose to share, you do so from abundance, not from lack. Living alone at this stage becomes a daily practice of presence, coherence, and respect for your inner life. And that, at any age, but especially after 60, is a profound form of freedom. There is a quiet shift that happens when a person learns to be okay living alone after 60. They begin to relate to others differently, not because they no longer need anyone, but because they stop needing from a place of fear. And this is perhaps one of the deepest and least visible benefits of all. Living alone doesn't take relationships away from you. It gives you back the ability to choose them with clarity. For many years, too many relationships are maintained out of inertia guilt, or fear of emptiness. Draining dynamics are tolerated because the alternative seems worse. Loneliness is experienced as a threat, not as a possibility. But when a mature person learns to inhabit their own company, something reorganizes inside. They no longer accept just any presence simply to avoid being alone, and that changes everything. At this point, which I call choosing relationships from awareness and not from need, a natural filtering takes place. Some relationships cool off, others transform, and some simply fall away, not out of cruelty, but out of a lack of meaning. Stoicism is very clear on this. Seneca said that it is not the person who has little who is poor, but the one who needs too much. When you no longer need someone else to complete you, you begin to relate from a healthier and freer place. This becomes very noticeable in relationships with adult children, family members, and long-standing friendships. Living alone allows you to stop being constantly available, constantly fixing things, constantly absorbing other people's problems. Not from rejection, but from calm boundaries. And interestingly, the relationships that withstand this new order often become more respectful, more honest, more balanced. They no longer seek you only for what you give, but for who you are. Something important also happens emotionally. When there is no emotional urgency, anxiety decreases. There is no need to force meetings, sustain empty conversations, or adapt to expectations that no longer make sense. Relationships are chosen, not endured, and that restores a sense of dignity that many people thought they had lost over the years. Living alone, in this final point, doesn't isolate you. It refines you. It makes you more aware of who you share your time, your energy, and your inner world with. And when you choose from that place, even a single conversation can be more nourishing than years of forced company. That is the real gain. Not more relationships, but better ones. And above all, relationships that don't take away your peace, but walk alongside it. Throughout this video, we've walked a path that many people don't even dare to look at. From the mental silence that brings order to inner life, to the body reclaiming its own rhythm, the strengthening of identity, the emergence of spiritual freedom, and finally, the ability to choose relationships from awareness rather than need. All of this points to an uncomfortable but liberating truth. Living alone after 60 is not an automatic failure. Very often, it is a recovery. I want you to hold on to one clear idea. Chosen solitude is not lack. It is space. Space to think, to heal, to decide calmly, and to live with dignity. Not everyone is meant to live alone, but many discover too late that they never learned how to be with themselves, and that is a skill that completely changes the way we age. This channel exists to accompany mature people who want to live with more clarity, healthier boundaries, and greater self-respect. Not from resentment or escape, but from an awake stoic awareness that chooses calmly in the middle of the noise. If something I shared today helped you see your situation through different eyes, then this space is fulfilling its purpose. Thank you from the heart for making it all the way here. If it feels right, leave this phrase in the comments. Today, I choose to live with dignity. Reading your words is part of this shared journey. I'm sending you a warm embrace, and I'll see you in the next video.